Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rhode Island Small Business Coalition's live forum. I'm your host, David Dadekian, a small business owner here in Rhode Island. I own Eat Drink Rhode Island. And one special note for our live forum today, while normally we are live and take questions on Facebook Live, because our guest was very generously willing to change her schedule a bit, we're doing this one to tape. We're pre-recording this show. So please do put your questions in the Facebook. If there are questions for our guest, we'll make sure she gets them. But my kids wanted to go away for school vacation week, and it was very, very nice of our guest today to accommodate their schedule. So as always, check out rismallbusiness.org for joining the coalition and things of that nature. And now, without further ado, our guest for today's show, Representative Barbara Ann Fenton-Fung of District 15, which covers Cranston.
Hey, thanks so much, David. Yeah, I know. And when it comes to school vacations, we want to make sure the kids stay nice and happy. It can be a good week. So I hope you guys have fun.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Appreciate you're doing this on a different schedule. So do you want to anything you want to say to the audience, the Small Business Coalition, before we get started? You want to jump right into the questions?
Well, I just want to say first off, it's been such a hard 2 years, and I just want to say thank you to everybody who's persevered through it all. I think government, whether we look back when this pandemic actually started, my husband was still in office as mayor, and that was his final year, and he left due to term limits. But it was funny, like we thought, all right, this will just be a 2 or 3 week thing. We need a temporary shutdown, and now we know almost 2 years later that wasn't the case at all. And I think the flexibility that everybody has shown, and the willingness to work with government, and government, has learned to be much more nimble. I think big picture here, and been able. I think it's been great too. We've seen a lot more engagement from the small business community, a group that usually you guys are just so busy. It's hard to get up to the State House. It's hard to reach out to your reps because you're working 24/7. And I think there's been a lot more engagement. I think government is better off for it. I think there's a lot smarter policies because of you guys. And I want to just say thank you for stepping up in the past 2 years, both from at your own place of work, but also helping to make government better, because you guys have.
It's very nice of you to say thank you. It is been an interesting way to see when my business slowed down to have the opportunity to do things like this, and many other businesses like that. So we're going to keep it going strong. Since you brought that up, it was a question I was going to do later in the show, but let's talk about the nimbleness and the ability to, there's always been Capitol TV and people could always watch committees and things of that nature. But now many reps can Zoom in. I know I was watching finance the other night with the budget, and there were a bunch of representatives on the Zoom. I don't know if you've done that lately, but I know you certainly did while the General Assembly was not going to the State House. And then the other option, the ability for people to call in to testify. I think they're fantastic. I think they're great ways to maintain democracy and to make sure, because as you know, everyone out there should know, we have a part-time General Assembly, so you've got a full-time job.
It's true. I actually work at the hospital. Yeah, I work at Rhode Island Hospital. I'm there till about 3:30, and then I run and change in the locker room, and then I run over just down the street to the State House. So it's, we're a part-time as well. I think when we talk about nimbleness and what we've learned, not just at the State House level, but also with your local city councils, local towns, school committees, that we are able to now, Zooming is becoming something that's we're much more comfortable with than before. So it's great that people can kind of see what's going on, even if it's later on. Okay, sometimes these meetings get taped and they can go back and what were they talking about there? There's always the options for that. I think it's wonderful. I actually had a bill last year in finance, and a lot of restaurant owners were calling in to help testify and try to get the bill over the finish line. And I had to laugh because there was one guy and he's yelling at the dishwasher and he's like, hold on a second. And he runs in and he's like, I need help, come down. And it was so authentic and real, because that's what small business owners face every single day. Right. They've done an amazing job. And so that's been wonderful. Speaker Shikarchi and ourselves too always say that he would prefer for all of us to be in person for the committee meetings. I think that's the most ideal case. There are, especially some of the restrictions that were, in place when we started the session in January. If somebody has COVID or symptoms, he doesn't want you there in the State House at all, understandably. The average age of the legislature isn't 20. And so we want to protect everybody as much as we can. So that's been a great option. Even if you're not feeling 100%, you can still participate via WebEx. It's not perfect. We all like to be in person a whole lot better, but you're right. It keeps democracy going. I wasn't in the State House when they shut down first in 2020.
That's right.
And that was difficult. I remember, not to say anything, but I was campaigning door to door, and sometimes people at the doors be like, they're just not in session. How can they not? You know, the world's falling apart and nobody's there in the building. So I think Speaker Shekarchi really did a good job at prioritizing technology here and making sure that, you know, we had the capabilities of WebEx. Those IT guys at the State House are wonderful, and they have kept this thing rolling for the past 2 years. And I think, you know, we need at the General Assembly level, and I've seen it in legislation too, that we're continuing to fund helping cities and towns do hybrid type meetings, you know, like you said, to improve engagement and whatnot at all those levels, because most of what impacts your daily life actually occurs down at the city and town council level or your school. So it's great to kind of open that door for them as well.
It's an excellent point. Well, thank you. Yeah, and I hope, I you know, ultimately for my own purposes, I hope, because there's sometimes I can't get to the State House to testify. I hope that option, you know, is remains open.
I think it will for a while. I think it will.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I think, you know, it's a good point. You know, sometimes we forget because it's been such a crazy 2 years. It seems like an eternity sometimes. But you are a freshman representative.
I am. I know it's. I beat Speaker Mattiello back in 2020, and so when I came in, I had a different set of expectations, I think, on me too. You know, you take out the speaker, you better be productive and whatnot. And so my whole goal was always to hit the ground running. So
yeah, well, I think you certainly did. I mean, so I was going to bring up obviously the two committees that are most pertinent to us with the Small Business Coalition. You're on the Small Business Committee, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And then also corporations and special legislature. I know those overlap sometimes with some small business issues. So can you give us, just for folks out there that aren't as aware, you know, we've talked a bit about the process of bills and how they become laws and things of that nature, so people get that. But tell us a little bit about committees and how committees work.
So every bill, if you want to, some people don't request them, but every bill has a hearing, and that happens in these committees. And so people, legislators like myself, who tend to have an interest in areas or a specialty in an area, will sit on different committees like small business, corporations. I'm on education, environment. And that way we're all kind of listening and talking and developing some expertise in each one of these areas so that we can make bills better. The first time you hear a bill, it always gets held for further study, which becomes this catchphrase sometimes, like, oh, they're just killing it. Really, every bill, when you hear it the first time, gets held for further study. Right. And what that means is we kind of lay it out on the table. Here's the bill as I'm presenting it to you. Here's some people calling in with their thoughts, either for or against, or, hey, I like it, but I would rather you add this little amendment here or whatnot. And bills actually get a whole lot better until a little bit later in the session, typically, that they'll start to move if we think this is a great idea, there's support. Most of the time in the House, we'll make sure that there's support in the Senate as well. You know, we want to make sure we're bringing it up on both sides of the chambers, because in order for these bills to pass, they have to pass both chambers. So sometimes we can head off problems early on in the committees. It's a great idea. All right, it's good. We're going to give it the thumbs up. We voted out of committee and it goes to the floor. And as freshmen, we tend to serve on more committees, I think. Then later on, you tend to get a little more specialized, or some committees are just so large, like finance, and take so much time that they will kind of hold off and say, you know, if you're on finance, you're only on one other committee or whatnot, so that everybody has enough time to devote to it. But they become really interesting. You get a good mix of people who serve on them, and everybody starts thinking about different things, and the whole goal is to make that bill better. And sometimes, you know, the hearings can go 3 or 4 hours long easily on one bill. And if it's a complicated one, and we want to hear from as many people, and that's at the part where you testify too. When people don't testify when the bill's on the floor, it's all done in committee. So we want to hear your voice to make the bill as great as we can. And sometimes they just don't move out of committees that year because for some reason, some people have a lot more concerns, or there's more concerns in the Senate. And, you know, again, some bills will be introduced in multiple years before they're passed out and get to a point where we think it's going to be good for the entire state.
Yeah. I think the new rule to allow the bills, and I think it's only a House rule, it's not a Senate rule this year, right? So
Yeah.
New.
Yeah, we had 3 bills that we could hold over from last year, so we didn't have to reintroduce them and whatnot.
Right.
And that happened on a couple bills that I'm signed on to as well. The right to an education, whatnot, is one of the bills for sure. There's a couple other ones as well. It's it's easier, I think, for the data team and everything.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good, sometimes you just don't have to do a new committee hearing if it passed really late in the session. There just wasn't enough time to get it over the fence in the Senate. They've come back early this year, and we've already moved a couple of those bills to the floor out of small business earlier this week. So,
yeah, I want to definitely talk about those two that passed out of small business. I'm thrilled to see both of those. But I was also say being able to renew them like that without having to go through the process again. It's a little easier for those of us who testify too, because we can keep track.
You're like, I deja vu again, right?
Well, there's that, yeah, but still, it's okay. It's good for the process. So yeah, let's talk about those two that came out this week and already passed through. They've already been transmitted to the governor, which is fantastic. Have been key for small business. One is the zoning moratorium, which for those of you out there are unaware, every city and town obviously has its own zoning, and in order to help out primarily restaurants, but it could be across the board. With outdoor seating and things of that nature, without having to go through the zoning process in each city and town. This is a moratorium on that through April 1st of next year. So thank you for passing that along, and hopefully, I know the governor's office is going to sign that because I believe that was part of his agenda this year. So that's great for businesses, and for those of you. We're happy to be recording this on a beautiful day. Winter's not left us yet, but take it outside is the slogan that became known around here. So I think it's great to see that being able to continue, and it's great for business. It really has.
The whole thing is, with everything that a small business owner faces, you don't want to have to go to one more zoning meeting, hire a lawyer in some cases to try to get something. So that you might add 10, 12 tables type of thing outside. Right. If that, for some restaurants, it's even smaller. And it's just saying, hey, look, we know you're stressed right now, and part of this crisis response is let's make your life easier. My whole goal is, let's make more of these a little more permanent in sensible ways. Okay, saying, hey, look, this worked, or we found these problems in certain areas, and we can tweak things. But I think this is a great trial period, and we get to learn, kind of by fire a little bit too. And we know we need to increase capacity. We know we need to increase distance, especially as mask mandates come off. And I think that it's a good compromise, and we're trying to say, let's make this a little bit easier for you, okay? And for the next year, we're going to eliminate that hurdle. And it's a good bill, and I believe that was Chairwoman McEntee's bill, and she's been very forceful on that. So.
Yes, it has been. I think it's a very good bill. So thank you for that. And we don't want to, obviously, because we have a lot of mayors come on the show and towns council folks, we don't want to take that away from the municipalities permanently. But I think, like you said, it's a way to experiment, figure out what works, what doesn't work. Maybe this could be a seasonal thing. Who knows? I think it's a great way to see how it's been working. And I think primarily from everything that I've seen and read, there's really been no real problems. I mean, a few here and there were like, okay, it's a little too close to residential or things like that. And obviously I think that's understandable. It's going to happen. But primarily this is great for places. So thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those, the only issues that we heard really in Cranston, there were a couple places who tried the igloos and whatnot. And there were some issues with ventilation and heating and other things. Also, some people had no choice. They had to go into parking lots, and that created some safety issues. So again, we're working through the kinks and seeing how government can work better for business.
Yeah. Well, I guess it was good for the concrete business to build those areas.
It was.
It helped somewhere.
There's a silver lining everywhere.
Exactly. Right. And then the other bill that's now permanent, which I love to see, is the again based on for restaurants and bars and pubs, is takeout liquor is now a permanent part of our liquor laws in the state of Rhode Island, which is. I know you and I've had this conversation before. I'm sure there are a lot of reps that be like, "Oh, there goes the Dadekian talking about liquor laws again." I just feel that we're very behind the times here, and it's fantastic to see that the places have this option now. Again, I think people, it's obviously a complex issue. It's been something that a lot of people have been concerned about, but primarily it's been very, very helpful to restaurants and bars to be able to, especially for cocktail places where you can bottle up a cocktail. It doesn't even have to have liquor in it. It's just, it's such a small part of it at that stage of the game. But legally that they're allowed to do that and sell that has been a great asset.
And that bill was actually made better by a local liquor store owner who came up and testified and say, hey, look, there's a little loophole that's going on. Some restaurants are taking advantage of selling below their costs and their retail costs and whatnot. And so we just made a quick amendment, still were able to move it on time out to the floor. And again, I think that's just government realizing we don't have time to sit here and think about things for 3-4 weeks, because that, I mean, look in here in the winter months, which are so stressful for restaurants anyway. I mean, this weekend we've got Valentine's Day, Super Bowl. If we put it off 3 or 4 weeks, you know, just kind of waiting around, it's literally hundreds of thousands of dollars for some restaurant owners. So it's definitely something we have to play with. The issue on that bill that I, you know, raised, and I know some small business owners really and restaurants want this to happen, but the delivery for alcohol has become something that we're talking a lot about, because it's very hard to say over those delivery drivers and whatnot if it's a minor. You know, there's still issues with that and how to get that to the house. And I think that's something we'll work through over the next few years. I know that's a big push by some restaurant groups, but I think we're still trying to figure out how to do that wisely and safely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, Rick and I have had long conversations about that, and I think it needs to be a certified delivery system and things of that nature. You know, it can't be some kid in an Uber. You know,
that's what you think, Uber Eats or DoorDash, or, you know, and it's a 17-year-old kid. We don't want to be arguing or put them in a difficult spot as well. So I think that's something we're going to be working through over the next probably session or two.
Yeah, I think we can come to a some sort of a fix on that eventually. But yeah, you know, it was funny when you know, we saw the amendment this week about selling under cost, and again, Rick and I got on the phone and we're like, who would do that? Why?
Evidently, there were a couple people.
So. Why would you want to lose money on your sales? But hey, you know, I can't judge every. You know, these are crazy times. So yeah, things like that are
people are doing. I know. So
things like that amendment are smart. So that's great. It's great to see. So also, like I mentioned, I watched the finance committee the other evening. I know that you don't serve on that committee, but eventually the full budget will get to the House. So I wanted to talk through. There are a bunch of small business items in the budget this year, and I kind of, you know, like to get your take on some of them and what you think about them. There's 3 that are related to actually 4 that are related to taxes. You know, I think the biggest one is probably the reduced interest rates for delinquent taxes, and I think, you know, these are kind of, you know, things that, you know, we don't think about sometimes, but I think they're kind of no-brainers in a way. But you know, there's a lot of nuance sometimes. So what do you take on? What's your take on that one?
Well, just think about somebody right now who gets behind just a little bit because of a month-long, you know, all their staff are out with COVID or whatnot. Sometimes when you get a little bit behind and then you start owing, and then the interest on it starts compounding so much, it's very hard to dig yourself out of a hole. And we're trying to eliminate and remove barriers out of the way. And so things like that make sense. Especially like right now, eliminating, you know, all the restaurants, all the small businesses, they still had to pay their taxes. They were shut down. They still had to pay their property taxes. And so you start this thing. All right. So that had to happen because the cities and towns still needed to run. What can we do from the state level? It says, hey, look, you guys did all that in a very stressful time financially. Can we take off more fees? Can we take off, you know, more re-registration fees? You know, all the little ticks and tacks that happen throughout the year. And that's where I'm looking when we're talking about the finance committee that's coming out. When you're thinking about what can we really do to move the needle for people, thousands of dollars in fees can help, you know, and it's not going to save a business for sure, but, you know, maybe that allows you to hire one more person back on, you know, and that's the type of movements we can make at the legislature level to help business and get people back on track. So and we're talking about lowering taxes, when we're talking about taking away fees, you're always going to kind of get a thumbs up from me to make sure, again, making sure that they're actually impactful. Sometimes you talk about, oh, let's take away this, take that, like, and they're like, oh, okay, like, thanks, it's $50. I'm not going to sit there and say, hey, look what I did for you. Like, you know, we need to make sure it's impactful and spread across the board too. One of the things we found out, and I know you hear this all the time from the businesses you work with, is that there were a lot of small businesses that didn't get access to either PPP loans or the EIDL because it was hard, especially for some minority-owned business owners, maybe who's like, they have conversational English, but maybe not so much understanding legal contracts and English and whatnot like that. And so I actually had a small business owner in my district who was trying to apply for all these loans, and especially through Commerce, they have the different grant programs.
Right.
And we actually hooked them up with the Center for Southeast Asians, and they helped translate everything. And that was really important in making sure they got that $5,000 grant, which helped them pay their rent and, got them to a better spot. Thank goodness they're still here today. But that's when we're talking about trying to make sure that we have enough access for people, and that we're talking, speaking to women, minority-owned businesses that were having other challenges. A lot of our women-owned businesses, they also had to be mom and do distance learning at home. And so all these different stressors, and you were trying to figure out which of these groups can we really help and take a step forward to. It's just, you have to stop and think a little bit. It's not just always intuitive in government. And we had to make sure that there was a priority placed because there were additional stressors. So.
Yeah, no, that's something the Small Business Coalition has helped with, especially one of our members, Jennifer Ortiz. She's been fantastic. She's right downtown, owns a barbershop downtown. And as you might imagine right now, unfortunately, it hasn't been as busy recently. So she's had more time, and she's been helping some businesses around her in the downtown area get some of these grants and things. So I think, groups like ours and others have been very helpful. So that's a great thing to hear. So you talked about impact. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's part of the governor's budget is dropping the corporate minimum tax from 400 to 375, which, to be frank, is not that impactful. It's good. Don't get me wrong. I think it's important to reduce these taxes, like you said. But I think something that we at the Small Business Coalition have kind of advocated for, and we'll certainly advocate for this drop because I think it is valuable, is a tiered system. Looking at a small business's revenue and say, okay, well, this small business obviously is making, $50,000 a year. Perhaps they get a $200 tax, and this small business is making $1 million a year, gets a $600 tax. That sort of thing, some sort of tiered system. I mean, what do you think about that reduction or tiered possibility?
Well, what you're talking about really is helping businesses scale. Okay, in their first 6 months, in their first year, what can we do? To make sure that they're still eligible for different types of healthcare. What can we take away some of their healthcare costs and whatnot? Can we incentivize it through different business tax cuts? And I think that's what you're talking about there, is you're trying to figure out, how do you take a business that has, a lot of people are hesitant to get in. You can see the statistics, especially women, people of color. Yeah. There's a lot of barriers that they perceive. And so when you keep adding taxes and they haven't even made $1 yet. And yet they're already putting out so much of their money up front. And entrepreneurship overall, this predates COVID, but it was definitely very stagnant for a long time. And, we spend billions of dollars in tax cuts. You see these cities all around the country, play these games to lure Amazon or whatnot. And we don't have that same type of investment in our small business community to spend, despite it being like over 96-97% here in the state right now.
I mean, I think that's a key number. People forget that sometimes. If you add the whole small business community up, it's bigger than, it's bigger than the Fidelity and the CVS. Not that those aren't valuable corporations to have in our state, but the Amazon deal in Johnson is going to be huge for Johnson. And when we interviewed the mayor of Johnson, he outlined the whole plan. But if you look at all the small business, it's such a huge part of our economy.
And it is, and that's what we want too, because we're seeing families live out the American dream. Like my husband, when his parents came here from Hong Kong, they owned a Chinese restaurant for like 4 decades. And, they built their American dream on it. Now, what government can do though, for those small businesses really is help them with the knowledge. Some of these small businesses, in order to make them more resilient, we really need to have them or help them gain an online presence a little bit. And a lot of them don't know how to do that. Or set that up. And so that's one area that government can really kind of step up and get it, because, all right, say there's another spike later on. Well, they'll say, hey, look, we're going to transition mostly to online sales, or we're going to do more takeout, whatnot, and helps them become more resilient and nimble as well. And I think that's one of the things when we're talking about getting knowledge and getting support systems out to these businesses. That can be something that government can play a pretty productive role in. But like when you're talking about impact, for sure, it's great. We want to cut taxes. We want to keep, as a Republican, I'm always going to say, what can we do when our revenues are higher and we've got this? Well, your revenues are higher because businesses are paying in more, individuals are paying in more, whatnot. Right. what can we do to give it back to them, and so that they can go reinvest it in their dreams as well. So I always, you don't have to keep spending. We can also say, hey, look, business owners and our individual families and neighbors know how to spend their money just as well, and give it back out. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a difficulty with some of the grant programs that came out during COVID. Obviously, we can't complain about free money. We're not going there. I'm not being that obnoxious, but I think that the restrictions sometimes upon businesses, sometimes with technical grants, things of that nature, to say, you need to spend it on this or that. So, the business knows often what's best for them to spend it on, and I think restrictions like that aren't very beneficial to some businesses. But I think something we have to live and learn. That sort of thing.
For sure.
Yeah.
And we're making it better. We're making our mistakes
Yes.
now. We can figure this out, and again, try to, in the next 2 or 3 years, build a much stronger and more resilient economy here in Rhode Island. So
Absolutely.
we got to take the lessons we learn and use them again. We can't.
And I think we're getting better at that. I do. I think communication's better. The nature of being able to grab someone via email or text or whatever, and just bounce an idea off people. I think it's getting easier and better at that. So that's great that people are willing to do that and willing to communicate like that. So talking about taxes, what's your thoughts on reforming the tangible tax?
So especially, there's the problem about different taxes. If I were to start a business in Cranston, right, the tax and street fees are just so different in each one. So the tangible tax is one of the ones that here, especially when we're trying to scale up in our manufacturing, becomes even more important. Okay, and we're talking about more retail. Those were the sectors that were really hurt here. So you could almost ask me the same question about every single tax, and I'll say lower is better. But I also say, is that what's going to make the difference for that business?
Right.
Is it the property tax that's really killing them because of their square footage? Where do we have to be in the sector? And I think it really, I'm a big proponent of local control and trying to figure out, for us especially, what will keep the business here in Rhode Island. We've got great businesses that can come in, but then they might leave. Like Johnson & Johnson came in, they got the whole setup, and then they left. So what do we need to do to actually build an economy, not just have a business come in for a little while? And so again, part of a bigger tax reduction strategy, all for it.
Excellent. And then the other tax issue in the budget is the taxpayer steward role, which again I think is kind of hopefully a helpful issue. I mean, people have questions. I mean, just the conversation we're having here, talking about taxes and how complex it can get.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea to have that steward. Yes.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we actually did in Cranston when my husband was mayor. And when you have someone who's in economic development in just saying, hey, look, let's walk you through this and understanding. So people also have the correct expectations, but when something goes wrong, that they can kind of adapt and be a little bit more, not just nimble, but responsive to their needs. People have questions. People need to be able to ask their questions in the language they understand and that they converse in very well. So I think making sure that we're addressing more multiculturalism too. When you talk about, especially I think of like the west side of Providence, I think about areas in Mount Pleasant. A lot of your small businesses are first time business owners, and they're from, especially in Providence here, Cambodia, or Guatemala, and just making sure that we are welcoming and inclusive and kind of going in that direction and taking a real big look at how government responds to the people who are here. And I think that'll be important for us as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And then one last thing I'm going to bring up because it's near to me, and I don't want to belabor it too much, but let's get the cottage food thing done this year if we could.
I've signed. Yeah,
I know.
I'm on the pickle bill. Yeah, right.
Yeah, but now that we're literally the last state in the country, let's get this through.
It's one of those ones that every time it comes up, it's like, okay, where are we here? Right. Sometimes it's just like, just do it. All right. It's not an enormous issue for many of us.
But it is, I think, you just said it about the new businesses coming from a lot of minority groups and women and other groups that are trying to start these businesses. And a lot of times, if you could start a food business in your home, just start. We're not saying you're going to become like, Martha Stewart out of your kitchen at home. Obviously not. You're going to have to grow and move into a facility, but you could start it. And that's an easier, remove that barrier for entry for a lot of those businesses.
And it's not so much in Cranston, but I've seen this like especially some of the other farms up in like the Smithfield region and whatnot.
Yeah.
You know, some people just retire and they just like to make something. They would sell it at a farmer's market, but they, you know, they want to do it out of their home like this and whatnot.
Right.
So it's just a nice. It's usually a side gig for most people, at least initially, and so I have to understand a little bit better what the opposition is to this. But again, sometimes these bills just get jammed up, and you just like, let's go, you know, let's roll with it.
Well, speaking of things that get spent a lot of time over the years, this is something you and I have discussed before. It seems almost an inevitability this year, but I really would look to your input. I think you raised some very good issues the last time we discussed marijuana and recreational marijuana and legalization.
Yeah.
Why don't you give us your thoughts? It looks like this is the year that it's going to happen, but I'm sure there's a lot of negotiation, a lot of regulation that we put into place. So where do you see things? What are your thoughts there?
So on marijuana, I am pro medical marijuana. I'm actually a very large proponent of it, especially when I talk about, I treat a lot of people in hospice and whatnot, and I would much, they're very comfortable using the edibles, using oils. Some people smoke it, whatnot. Otherwise, they would be using high dose opioids, and so that goes on not just for people in hospice, but people with chronic pain issues. So I see it as a very helpful issue when we're talking about medical marijuana. Recreational marijuana, I've always had kind of an eye roll approach to it because, look, in Rhode Island, we don't need to repeat the mistakes of every single state that's gone before us, too. So it's been nice that so many have gone up, and then we're seeing the statistics and saying, hey, look, all right, this worked well in Colorado, or this didn't work well in Massachusetts, and learn from them. And said, so there's a lot of regulatory issues, but then we also have to think of the secondary issues that have popped up. SAMHSA, which is one of the nation's largest mental health organizations, put together kind of like a retrospect on like the first 5 states that did this. And DC, I think, was part of the report too. And they brought up issues that, over their like the first 2 or 3 years, there was more property crime, property insurance rates were going up. There was some concern about school suspensions in some states, earlier marijuana use, which has been tied into, for people who have mental health predispositions, especially schizophrenia, we saw complications early on. So there's some health issues there. There's some property issues that were brought up. Crime rates were a little inconsistent, back and forth with, violent crimes. So I start to think like, all right, what other safeguards can we put in place to make sure that this is as safe and safe a rollout as possible? I also defer a lot to my police chief. We have here in Cranston, Mike Lindquist, who's just absolutely lovely. And, the police chiefs have their concerns, and I know they've been at the table talking about it. We don't have a breathalyzer for marijuana like we do for alcohol. And so, what other pressures does that put on our police force and that? So I think those are all issues that I've always just brought up and been like, are we ready for this? And if not, what else do we have to do to get there? And what do we need to think about other supports in place? So there seems to be a lot of momentum for it here at the State House this year. So we'll see if it comes across the finish line. I'm less concerned about the regulatory issues as I am just more from my role in healthcare as saying like, all right, what can we, there was one state that came by, it was more hash oil burns they found out in one state, and there's all these things like what do healthcare practitioners have to look for, and just get everybody ready. If it's inevitable, it's inevitable. Like we'll see what the final bill is that comes out. But you always try to raise these when a train's going down the tracks. You just always want to say like, hey, have we thought about this yet? What else can we do to make whatever bill that comes out a little bit better? And so we'll wait and see. I haven't seen the final bill. I've talked to some of the sponsors and whatnot and relayed my concerns. And we'll see. This isn't, I think what everybody agrees here is that this isn't the marijuana that our parents smoked in the 60s.
True.
Okay? Or the THC content is much, much higher. And so there's a lot of other healthcare issues that come up alongside of that. So they understand that, and they've definitely looked at it. There are some states that have done this better than others. And I think the speaker and the team that's working on this piece of legislation is trying to understand that and incorporate that as much as they can. So
Well, that's good to hear. I think your perspective is certainly a valuable one. Certainly gave me things to think about the last time we talked about it. And, I think, as you said, maybe, maybe the session, maybe not, but I hope that all these things can be worked into it. Obviously, from the Small Business Coalition perspective, we want to make sure that it's not, big corporations that are coming in here and running these things. We'd like to see small businesses. We'd like to see, small farms using it, for agricultural purposes, because we obviously see it from a financial perspective. But the medical perspective, things of that nature that you bring is extremely valuable. And I think that's great to hear. I'm glad you are able to share that with our audience.
yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Um, all right. So I think we've run through a lot of the small business things that we wanted to talk about, things that our members asked about. Anything you see coming down the line for small business, either in committee or just conversationally with your colleagues that you think might be interesting to keep an eye on?
There's the deadline for the bills to be introduced is a couple weeks. There's been some people starting to talk about legislation as far as remote work hours and whatnot. I think one of the great things that's happened throughout the pandemic is that we've been a little bit more nimble, especially when we're talking about responding to family dynamics. That sometimes working at home 2 days a week really takes off a lot of stress on some of the the family stressors that go around. Oh, I can pick up the kids today, or I can take them to school. I can get them off the bus. And so there's been some interest in making sure that those type of options are available, big picture, being a little bit more flexible, working from home, differing hours. And I'm not sure how, mandating that's a good idea, but we'll have to figure out how to promote issues like that.
Sometimes, right. It's
Yeah.
more about promoting it and getting the word out in an organized fashion than just mandating it, right?
Yeah, I don't think one size fits all, but I think we're trying to come up with as many different sports. What would businesses need to make that work? But also, I think the funding issues to really keep programs open through commerce to try to help small businesses take their business online. Again, not as maybe their primary mode, but as something that can be used to improve their resiliency. Those have been issues that I definitely want to keep working on, for sure.
Excellent. Yeah, no, the online issue you mentioned it before, and I've had the chance in the last couple of years to help a couple of businesses get the products online and things of that nature, and it's part of our economy, and not everyone has that opportunity to do it. So thank you for that, because I think maybe a technical grant or some sort of system that can be put into place.
It's not easy for some people.
No, right.
It's not if it's not your intuitive nature to be in that kind of high tech space and how to do it. And we're talking about issues with cybersecurity. I definitely think it's something we could work with the Small Business Administration at the federal level to at least make it available and help these small businesses weather some storms.
That's a great idea. Thank you. Yeah. So talking on the federal level, any thoughts on the ARPA funding? And I know it's early on in the conversations and everything, but all our members are always, hey, there's these billions of dollars coming in. What do you see in terms of small business? What do you see that might be a possibility down the line?
So the ARPA funding, it's one of those programs that isn't as well understood. There's certain buckets they can go into,
right. Yeah.
And I think the governor has really made it a priority through this to say, especially we're talking about tourism industry, which was really hit. You think about towns like Newport, you think about Westerly, Narragansett. They've been Newport, especially, probably is one of those towns that's just been hit the hardest. I was born there. I grew up in the area. And, not only did you not have concerts you had a modified one last year, but still a significantly slower concert season. And then you don't have the cruise ship season that's on top of it. So we have some of these towns that are really going. And I think there's been some preliminary, when I looked at the program, we got more detail even on Thursday, which we're taping this on a Saturday. There's definitely going to be targeted industries that get maybe a little bit higher when we're talking about grant money to get out. We know there's been a lot of grants to the restaurant industry as well. So I see that continuing. I think Governor McKee has put a large focus on small business programs and making sure that, I think our key here at the legislature is to say that they get spread out so that people in Coventry have the same access to it as they do in Woonsocket and Providence and whatnot. But because you can have a great small business, just that might not be in Newport where they're trying to target more or whatnot. You just have to make sure it's equitable. And also just really targeted on keeping the small business, like what's going to get you through this year and what's going to set you up for success next year. We were talking about impact earlier on. And again, I think here it plays into the same discussion. Okay. What can we do to you for a grant to get you to that next spot? And, tailoring that, like you mentioned earlier, some of the grants were so restrictive in one way or the other. And so we have to make sure that these programs that'll go out need to be flexible, but also impactful. I'll say that, but you almost sound like a broken record at sometimes with this, but that's what it is. And we're deciding where it's going. I think that small business community will have a very good, we hope, success with this budget, and that this will be helpful not only just to get everybody through the crisis, but also set them up for greater success.
Yeah, I think that's key. We have had a lot of discussion with that with the Small Business Coalition. We have our board meetings. Yeah, the grants have been key for keeping people alive and afloat. But moving forward, we don't want to keep patching holes. We want to raise more business and get better at what we're doing. So.
And scale them and have our businesses go to scale. And one of the things we hear a lot about is always the healthcare costs and whatnot. So I can see maybe some incentives down the road for that to help offset some of these healthcare costs, if that's the program that really needs to happen type of thing. Again, we hear it in different parts of the state and trying to figure out, again, what can we do at the state level and then what can happen at the city and town level.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Well, that's everything that I had here. This has been a great discussion. Thank you very much. Is there anything you want to add before we close?
No, I appreciate it for sure. It's been lovely being able to just talk for a little bit. And David, you're always such a great wealth of knowledge too. But I started off saying, hey, thanks to every small business that's been up here and gone to the State House and reached out to us. And I want to say our door is always open. My door is certainly always open. And not only what can we do for you, but also any bits of knowledge that you're just seeing on the ground that are saying, hey, look, this one program that you guys institute, it's really not working. I need you to tweak it. I mean, this type of two-way discussion that didn't go on as much pre-COVID is really helping us make a better government for you. So I just want to say thank you again for all the hard work you guys have done, the Small Business Coalition, but also just kind of making sure that we're going to set up well in the years to come. So I think we're good.
Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Representative Barbara Ann Fenton-Fung. Thank you very much for the time, Representative. That was an excellent conversation. I really enjoyed that. As always, Rhode Island Small Business Coalition can be found at rismallbusiness.org, where you can sign up for the newsletter. Lots of things coming down the pike. It's really getting very exciting. But we also got a lot of great guests coming up. We've got Representative Slater, Felipe and Alzate coming up on the show. We've got Secretary of State Nelly Gorbea coming up on the show, and Senator Jessica De La Cruz, who's also running for Congress. So it's an election year. We hope we can get all the candidates on here to talk about their views on small business and how they can help our small business community. As always, I appreciate you watching. Take care.